Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. It's time to save the blue harvest. And with me to discuss the fourth episode of The Mandalorian, Sanctuary, is Gabby Martin and Thomas Harper. Gabby and Thomas, how are you both doing tonight?
I'm doing good, sipping on spatchka and trying to warm up in the snow.
Thomas?
I've got to make it through all these turkey leftovers before I can finally make some blue krill, I think they're called. Just giant blue prawns, I suppose. Those look pretty good.
Yes, yes. Oh, how I do love turkey. Uh, this is the post-Thanksgiving episode, so it's been fun, and for many folks, they stayed up to 12:30 a.m. Pacific time to watch the fourth episode of The Mandalorian. I was in the 3:30 a.m. club, and it's so surreal how people are getting up super early because they're excited to see this. I don't know the last time that anything like this has happened.
Fighting off the tryptophan, just dragging you down to watch. I thought about staying up until midnight on the East Coast to see if it dropped, and I'm glad it looked like it did not drop until probably 3:30 Eastern time. I would have been slightly upset at that failure because by about 4 p.m. I was really dragging from turkey and potatoes and everything else.
Yeah, I called it early on Thanksgiving night, going to bed at 10 because again there was a lot of turkey involved, and I was tired. But once again, I've had fun with this episode, and it is a cornucopia of legal issues. One of which is another recurring theme of the duty to rescue.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, we see Omera, who's with her daughter, and they're harvesting krill in a krill farm. So we can get into fishing, farming if people want to go down that road. And raiders attack. And Omera goes back for her daughter. Gabby, would you like to get into the duty to rescue issues that carry upon our last episode into this one with mother and daughter?
Yeah. So in the last episode, we were, kind of debating of what type of duty to rescue the Mandalorian had with Baby Yoda in the Imperial compound. It's unclear because there's no formal relationship between them, what his duty to rescue would have been, whether it would have been a kind of in loco parentis role, or whether it would have been due to the fact that he was the one that put Baby Yoda in the danger, that he now has a duty to rescue. But here it's nice because we have a very clear duty to rescue. Winta is her daughter. She looks up, and apparently everybody abandoned Winta, who's just kind of on the verge of being attacked. And so Omera goes back and rescues her daughter and hides her under the basket in the ponds from the ATST. And this is kind of the very clear duty to rescue, that parental relationship, that there would have been severe consequences, both morally, I think, and also legally, if Omera had seen her daughter, about to be attacked and just kind of kept going, instead of going back to rescue her.
Yeah, I don't know of any story or any news report outside of Casey Anthony where mom doesn't go back for the kid. Yeah, I think that's this, fundamental fact of I gave birth to you, and I'll be damned if I watch you get shot up. So I think that's just a biological impulse to go back and save your kid. And the way they do it was ingenious, with in the water, hiding underneath a basket.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was very, very clever. And in their krill farms, this raises wonderful issue for, that we see later. She's a good shot. Like, that isn't just I picked up how to shoot. It's I don't miss, and I'm using this, automatic blaster. Did anyone else get the feeling she served in the military, whether it was rebellion or imperial or some militia on some other planet?
I think we're going to get a little more to her backstory. At least I hope so, because when they're handing out those blasters, not only does she have experience, but everybody else gets sort of a dinky dunk little blaster pistol, and she's handed, if you caught it, it's the blaster model's a Relby, and it's the same model that Bosk, the bounty hunter, uses. So not exactly a light duty weapon there that she's handed. So and she wields it like a professional. So whether she's a former mercenary in another life, a bounty hunter herself, ex-military, who knows? But he makes that announcement that Cara Dune is a veteran, and I almost wanted her to speak up and be like, and me.
Yeah, because if she is and was trying to lay low, you're not doing a good job if you're showing what an expert marksman you are with, I'm going to shoot the swinging tiny frying pan from a distance repeatedly.
Beginner's luck times 1,000.
Yeah, it's like, wow, don't make her mad. And she can cook. Why would you leave? But but I digress. There's another recurring motif, and I don't know if we're going to see this repeatedly, but the fact it happened in 2 episodes back to back was weird. That the Raiders shoot another R2 unit driving a wagon, and it's kind of the same style that the R2 unit that clearly was in the employment of Grief Karga, shot. So it happened again. So I don't know if that's going to be like a weird motif with droids taking a blaster that are driving a wagon, but we see either he got better or it's another droid that looks exactly the same driving that wagon to go get the Mandalorian and then take him back to the Razor Crest at the end.
I couldn't tell whether it was the same unit that you see at the very beginning helping harvest. You see this sort of modified R2 or R4 unit that's up on almost like long-legged ATST style stilt legs that's helping. But regardless of which it is, it harkens back. And like, if you think of this as a Western, and you think of old Western movies or just bandits in general coming in, they not only rob you, but they go shoot your horses as well. Or in this case, I mean, horse if it's the droid that's pulling the wagon, or maybe an ox if it's the one that's helping harvest. Like, either way, it's just a finger right in the eye to those poor farmers.
Well, it's the guy driving the stagecoach with the Western theme.
Yeah,
because it was. Yeah, there was the modified R2 unit on the long stilt legs for harvesting, but this was a standard R2 unit or R4 unit because it was the square type type head, very similar to the one that I made at Galaxy's Edge, and I do like that design. And it's like the little guy, gets kind of a point blank. It's like it was like a staff that shocked him. And it's like the episode before, another R2 unit or R4 unit got shot. Is that a weird theme? And is it murder if you shoot one of those guys, or is it battery because they might be able to get rebuilt? Anyone want to tackle that?
Destruction of farm equipment.
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
I don't know. I
think
property. Yeah, exactly. I think back in, I'm not an expert on the laws of the Old West, but certainly there were laws on the books related to killing horses that were a little different than stealing or damaging other property. They were looked at as sort of a different type of value as an asset. And if this was an R2 unit whose sole purpose was moving this wagon and helping get people around, maybe it's treated a little differently than something that just kind of helps out around the farm generally. Another thing, I don't know what the value of the crop that they stole was, but I have to believe that an R2 unit, R4 unit is fairly valuable. And if you're talking in degrees of theft, those laws and the punishments that go along with them are generally set based on the value or the amount that you've stolen or damaged or destroyed. And so if they're stealing a really cheap crop for whatever purpose, and then they go and destroy a really expensive R4 unit, that could bump them up in terms of the types of punishment that they could face. So a stupid sort of rash decision there could land them in a little hotter criminal water.
Yeah, I do think this would cross into grand larceny, at least, because like that has to cross the $950 threshold.
Mm-hmm.
That entire crop had to be worth more than $950, whatever the galactic exchange rates are for credits that they're using.
Some pricey shrimp.
Yeah. Even if Miss Dune referred to it as lunch money for her payment, it still had to be in excess of like $950. But it's definitely I've always had a soft spot for those droids, because you look at them, it's like, yeah, that's neat. I mean, there's a reason why people spend $100 to build one at Disneyland, because people are automatically drawn to them. Which brings us to the Mandalorian arriving on the planet, and he goes to the lodge restaurant, where they do take a page out of Galaxy's Edge with welcome travelers. So I thought that was very cute to work in. But we see a Loth Cat, and I think it's the first time we get a live action Loth Cat, because I don't think any of the recent films have ever shown one. So these were premiered in Star Wars Rebels. The cat kind of growls at Baby Yoda, and it's like, okay, should that thing be on a leash? I think yes, even though leash laws are generally written for dogs. But Gabby or Thomas, your thoughts?
I would say, yeah, that it has to be under some, like you said, leash laws are written primarily with dogs in mind. But I think any sort of animal has to be kind of managed by the owner. And, let's say that the Loth Cat hadn't just growled at Baby Yoda, but had actually attacked him. Then whoever at that table owned the Loth Cat, or if he belonged to the owner of the restaurant, they would be on the hook for any injuries that Baby Yoda sustained as regard of as related to the Loth Cat.
I also think there might be another factor at play, that from Rebels, I don't remember any of those being domestic. I think they're wild animals.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, then it's strict liability.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody has you have your pet grizzly bear, and it mauls a dude, it's like, it's a grizzly bear. Like, that's not domesticated. So it's...
This is my emotional support mudhorn.
Yes.
Having come from Florida, where people have, animals of all types and shapes and sizes and interesting backgrounds, yes, you are fully on the hook for your dumb decisions to bring in a wild animal to your property.
I'll say I involuntarily giggled very loudly when the Loth Cat came on screen. Just like pure excitement escaped me, and my family did not get it. They were like, "What? It's like an alien cat. It's a Star Wars cat. I don't get it." I was like, "Don't worry about it. Just let it go."
Yeah, I'm an adult male watching cartoons. Big deal. It's art.
Get off my case.
I tell you, it's art. I don't attack you for your soap operas. Or you with your news programs. No. So let's talk about Cara Dune's early retirement. And, like, did she go AWOL? Is she a deserter? I mean, like, what happened there? Because she did clean up after Endor, went taking out warlords, and then was on like diplomat duty, and she was and suppressing riots. I don't know if anyone else caught that, but suppressing riots. And I would love to know, what riots were you suppressing and how? Uh, because that if it's former Imperials, just hypothetically, if it's like, say, post Civil War or World War II, in Germany there were the werewolves who were the guys putting up piano wire to behead people in jeeps, or those embittered about losing the Civil War who thought it'd be a good idea to put on white sheets and terrorize people. Either way, you don't have a problem with sending in shock troopers to take out those folks. We passed a force bill in 1871 so we could hunt down and eliminate the Klan, and President Grant was right to do that, and it worked. Like, what situation was the New Republic sending out shock troopers to take out rioters? Who was rioting? Or is it just a throwaway line that we'll never learn anything else about? But Thomas, putting on your JAG hat, what was your take on her life's choices background?
I do like the idea that it's a bunch of stuffy ex-Imperials that are just upset with their lot in life and how things have shaken out, and they send in shock troopers to deal with them. Like, you know what? We're not being diplomatic with you guys anymore. You can deal with Cara Dune at this point. No, this was one of the most fascinating parts of the episode, because it's something I hope that we get a bigger peek into. But Cara is very cagey about her past. She leaves the restaurant, the lodge, and ambushes the Mandalorian because she thinks he's a member of the guild that's tracking her. So she's got some liability. I think it's fair to say that she's not a rebel soldier that just kind of mustered out, like, completed her normal term of service, ended her contract, and went her separate way from the military. And with that in mind, she's either one of two statuses: AWOL, which is absent without leave, or a deserter. And generally, the distinction in the real world is AWOL is a temporary absence. It can extend for a while, but the idea is that you don't have the intent to remain away permanently. I think Cara, given where she is on this very remote planet, in a situation where she clearly doesn't want to be found, certainly by not by somebody that wants to drag her back to the New Republic, I think she's probably more in the deserter camp. And that's where you have the intent. You become a deserter when you have the intent to remain away permanently. And you can get into more trouble if you desert during wartime, because obviously that's a sort of a more egregious crime. That wouldn't be the case here, because at this point in galactic history, they've signed the peace treaty, the Galactic Concordance with the Empire. There is no hot war, so to speak, and that sounds like it's sort of the reason why she ran off. She was just dissatisfied with her duties overall. I do wonder whether we'll find out whether she was being made to do things that, not that she didn't sign up for, but morally she didn't sign up for, that the New Republic was sort of coloring outside the lines, so to speak, and if that fed her decision, and we start to see a little gray area. But it's a problem for Cara Dune, because she's effectively like one of these bail jumpers that could be hunted down, because a deserter, no matter how long you've been gone from the military, they still have jurisdiction over you. I mean, you could have a deserter from the Korean War that the military could track down, fine, bring back and court-martial. You're still in the military. You're not owed any pay for that time period or anything like that, but they've still got those jurisdictional hooks in you. So she could be brought back and made to face a court-martial. So it's a significant thing. The crime of desertion carries significant penalties with it under the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So it's not something that It's not like, a low level crime. It's something that she would want to stay hidden from. But I found that fascinating.
I would wage the question, if she deserted because of riot suppression, was that an illegal order situation and she said, I'm done?
Right.
And
Well,
and like we don't know, and maybe we will, but again, another question that I have.
yeah. Well, and then the problem is that the the technical defenses for desertion don't include a disagreement with orders or something like that. So that would be a powerful case in extenuation or mitigation. You could probably go to negate a jury, certainly a military jury, if you present evidence and say, hey, I signed up for the New Republic because I wanted to do good and defeat the bad guys. And here we are doing the same things that the bad guys were doing. I just left. No harm, no foul. I go my separate ways. I'm done with this organization. That might change the minds of some jurors, even if it's not a technical defense to the elements.
And well, we know we get to see her again, so like they didn't bring in that kind of talent just to go, thanks, and away she goes. We know she's in season 2, and yeah, I have theories and wishes, but those are dangerous things to have when it comes to Star Wars on who we get to see again. So here was one of my favorite issues with this episode, with the Sorgan farmers go and try to hire the Mandalorian with their lunch money. And basically the Mandalorian says like, okay, I'll do it because you can give me lodging. And instantly I thought of Magnum PI, because Thomas Sullivan Magnum worked for Robin Masters as his chief of security, and his form of payment was getting to stay in the guest house and drive the Ferrari. And that raises interesting landlord-tenant issues, which we can get into. So, but that's like terms of the contract of it's work for a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And we then throw in a partnership with the Mandalorian, bringing in Cara Dune to help with this contract with the farmers.
She's a subcontractor.
She's either well, there are a couple ways to look at it, and we can each take a swing at this. We either have the Mandalorian as the contractor with the farmers, and because of that, he then formed the partnership with Dune. And if it's that raises all kinds of fun questions with, is she now in privity with the original contract, so thus she has contract rights to the farmers or not? And let's just break down some of the partnership issues, because it could be a partnership or it could be a joint venture. I mean, this varies with state law. And the first time I really got into this was analyzing the partnership issues in Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, because with Marion says, I'm your goddamn partner. I think this is analogous to that, except it's more factual working relationship as opposed to ex-lovers. But the essential elements for a partnership is the association of two or more persons to carry on as co-owners of a business for profit, form a partnership, whether or not the persons intend to form a partnership. That sounds on point to this. Or in the California swing of things, it could be a joint venture, which resembles a partnership in that members associate together as co-owners of a business enterprise, agreeing to share profits and losses. And for them, their profit was a place to stay so they could lay low. And Dune also got some credits for it. Gabby, what's your read on this?
I mean, I can see how it can be read as a partnership, as far as whether or not they intended to form a partnership. that their joint venture partnership, that they're kind of going into this, this business to protect the farmers. However, I have to agree with Thomas that I think this is more of a contractor-subcontractor relationship, because the Mandalorian is given the additional credits, and then he himself hires Dune in order to, as kind of additional muscle, if you will, that the contract, that she is needed in order to help him fulfill his contractual obligation to the farmers. So there's more of a subcontractor relationship there than any sort of partnership. That was my take on it.
I think if I'm the Mandalorian, it's like the safest route is to have her as a sub, because I don't want her, as you said, Josh, in privity with these farmers, being able to affect the terms and be on equal footing as me. And if I'm hiring you on, Kara, you're the muscle that's going to form some of this plan. I'm going to farm out some of this training to you. You take on the hand-to-hand combat training. I'll do blaster work, and then I'll sub out some of this this business of taking down the ATST to you. And that way he gets her help. He gets what he needs out of her without putting her on equal footing and sort of eroding his own position. I think the way they operate, though, is if a court's going to read this or read into the surrounding factors, I think they're going to read it more like a joint venture. That's the way they act. I mean, certainly the Mandalorian sees her as an equal, and as they talk and whatnot, they're sharing duties equally. I think the fact that he tosses her the credits is because he doesn't need the money. Like, he doesn't need that pit. What he needs is the lodging. I mean, he was ready to turn down the entire job because the credits weren't enough, but he can toss her a little bit of coin, get her on board, and get what he needs out of it.
Yeah, well, that was the opening negotiation, and in partnerships, each side can contribute different amounts to the beginning of the partnership. And in her case, I'm like, maybe the capital was given to her for that reason. I mean, there are multiple ways to look at this, but which brings us to the next contractual issues, just so we take care of all the contracts issues at once. When our heroes discover that there's an ATST, and for those who saw Return of the Jedi and we're just clapping hysterically, it's like, oh, we get to see one again. And it's not like in the background in Empire, or just like a couple quick shots like in Solo. It's like, ooh, this is actually serious. They, like, watching the beginning, you can clearly hear it. Like, you don't see it, but you can clearly hear it. And Kara is the one who says to the farmers, it's like, you knew about this and didn't tell us about it. Yeah. So that raises the non-disclosure of a material fact, which can be a form of misrepresentation in contract law, because there was a non-disclosure not in accord with the facts. And in California, anyway, that gets into a cause of action of concealment, where you have a duty to speak may arise in four ways. It may be directly imposed by statute or other law. It may be voluntarily assumed by contractual undertaking. It may arise as an incident of a relationship between the defendant and the plaintiff, and it may arise as a result of other conduct by the defendant that would make it wrongful for him to remain silent. Hiring the Mandalorian and Cara Dune coming in, whether it's as a sub or as a joint venture or as a partnership, they should have known about the ATST in order to do their job, because that's a really big material fact. And how did they not think that would be important for them to know? Or were they just that clueless in negotiating with, we're just simple farmers, we just harvest our krill, and these bad men are killing us?
It's not clear that they knew what it was. They certainly didn't know the name, because he says, either he or Kara say the name ATST, and one of them just confusingly says, like, "What's that?" Like, I don't understand that term. And in the initial raid at the beginning of the episode, you don't see the ATST come out. I think it probably fires on the village, but it's just the raiders that come out of the woods. So it's not clear that they know what it is, and nobody sits there in the crowd and says, "Oh, the metal beast," or describes it in some other way that makes it clear. So there's an argument there that the villagers have not faced that particular threat yet.
Again, this goes to how the episode was directed and edited, because they wanted it to be a surprise, and that's a good thing.
But it does. Oh, go ahead.
No, you first. You first.
No, what I started thinking then was, if we consider that O'Mara may have been part of the rebels or a shock trooper, any number of various military roles, this might have been her by not disclosing that fact, because she may have heard it and known exactly what it was, or known kind of generally what it was, because she does, in addition to having, being an excellent shot, she also seems to have command of this village. She tells later on in the episode, when they're facing the siege, she commands several of the different villagers to go out and fight, and she takes kind of a leadership role in comparison to the other villagers. So if she did kind of spur this, and we know that she was the one who theoretically initiated this idea to contact the Mandalorian, or at least go to where the ships were to contact whoever that was that came in a ship, because we see her, when the Mandalorian ship comes into the atmosphere, we see her look up and see his ship. So that means that she was the one to initiate this idea. So maybe she tried to have an upper hand in this bargaining agreement by withholding that fact, that and making it seem that the problem they were facing was much less than it actually was.
Well, and what's the duty of two professionals as they negotiate this, to go out and do their due diligence, to do a little bit of recon in this instance and try to size up the threat? I mean, is it enough that they ask on, because what we don't see is them ask, "Hey, what's the threat here? What are we facing?" There's sort of a general discussion of protecting them from the raiders, but you don't really see the Mandalorian or Kara go into any depth or any kind of scouting mission before they've taken the job to really get a sense in their arms around what's going on.
Yeah, when you're told there are raiders, they've stolen our harvest, save us. Should he have asked, do they have heavy artillery? Sir, do they have air support? Like, are you not telling me something I should know? Because it's not like I'm here with 50 Ewoks who can lend a hand with this, bringing one of these things down.
No, it's a fair question.
An army.
Yeah, it's a fair question. What kind of artillery are they working with? Oh, and also they have heavy armor support.
Oh, by the way, because when he was talking with Cara Dune on the wagon on the ride over, it's like, okay, at best where it was you get to clean your blaster, or we're a deterrent. Like, they weren't expecting, we're going to have to do a serious military raid in order to bring down this giant raiding party that's harassing these poor krill farmers.
Yeah, they just go to sleep. Yeah, they've taken, and I would say, in terms of an arm's length negotiation, like they went into the contract having had ample opportunity to ask all the questions that they wanted to on that wagon ride, and they passed it up.
Now, granted, how much of this was like a mistake of fact? Because the Mandalorian goes to that planet thinking, like, okay, so there's no spaceports, there's no industrialization. So he's not thinking in terms that there's going to be leftover Imperial equipment, specifically heavy artillery that could make his life difficult, because that would be a good reason to go, I'm going to keep going. We're going to fly right by here and find some other mud hole to call home for a while. I'm sure Dagobah's nice this time of year. Like just go chill someplace else. Uh, but yes, a contract exam can be written on these issues, and God Almighty, I love it. Now one of you, and I'm not sure which, so whoever brought up the notes and the outline, jump on this. Did the Mandalorian commit child abuse by trying to tell Baby Yoda, stay here on the ship, don't touch anything, I'm going to go find this lodging? Because the dude doesn't understand kids.
Yeah,
so,
clearly.
I mean, and he's also talking to a 50-year-old infant, so he's so he's in completely uncharted waters. I do believe he's doing a good job given the situation, but is that child abandonment?
Yeah, that was what my first concern was. I was, watching it and I'm like, God, like he tries to abandon this kid at least 2 or 3 times in the episode. And I was just like, that there has to be something like, would he be guilty of child abandonment? And, child abandonment is defined as the parent or guardian or person in charge deserts the child without any regard for the child's physical health, safety, or welfare, and with the intention of wholly abandoning the child. So I don't know if he wholly intends to abandon the child. Certainly later, right before Baby Yoda gets shot, he intends to abandon him, by he's transferring guardianship from himself to Omera. So it's not necessarily pure abandonment, he's just transferring guardianship. So, but when he leaves him in the cantina or bar or whatever you want to call it, he just kind of gives the server, a credit and is like, here, watch the kid. Is that credit that he gives to the server? Is that to provide for the kid's needs? Is that just like you would pay a babysitter to pay her for the service of watching the kid? It's just he clearly does not know how to have a child. Like, he's not a good parent.
Well, you do have jurisdictions where even a sort of I would say a temporary abandonment. So you don't necessarily have the mental state that you're just going to ditch your kid forever. But say you leave your kid alone and it's a 50-year-old toddler or infant, and they're just wandering around outside, or like they've got access to the kitchen and knives and stuff, and you've just made a run to the grocery store for a perfectly legitimate reason. I've got to get milk and baby food, right? That could still get you in hot water. I mean, you see news articles almost every day, whether it's a parent leaving a kid in a hot car, tragically, or just, outside alone at home, doing that sort of thing, and folks can get into some difficulties there. I distinctly remember when I came onto active duty, I used to have to go to this new soldier briefing where folks from around the base, the different services you could have, would send a rep to talk to batches of soldiers that were arriving to Fort Stewart to start their duty there. And there was always a representative from the Childhood Development Center, which is like the base's daycare. And she would give this impassioned, like a riot or taking everybody to task and warning folks about letting their kids roam around the base unsupervised. And she would tell these horror stories about how such and such soldier, his 6-year-old was found at the playground alone and unsupervised, and they called the military police, and the military police came and arrested this guy. And I would have to come in there. They're like, okay, next up is JAG. And everybody is like, holy cow, is this stuff true? And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Don't let your 6-year-old go to the playground alone. Just supervise them. So yeah, like I think if somebody stumbled upon Baby Yoda alone in the Razor Crest with like all these weapons available, and I don't know if the controls are locked down or anything, that could cause a problem for him just as much as leaving a baby alone in a lodge on a strange unknown planet after you flipping the bartender a quarter. Good.
And he clearly knows how to operate the controls
Yeah.
of the ship, because I mean, now there's obviously the meme going around of Baby Yoda turning on one form of music and the Mandalorian turning it off, in true kind of parenting style. But he clearly is adept at using the controls, but he doesn't have the wherewithal to properly use the controls. And you could imagine a situation where he accidentally ends up flying himself out of the planet. So yeah, definitely child abandonment, maybe not, but child neglect, possibly. He just needs some parenting lessons.
This whole show is just a thinly disguised new parenting class. I'm convinced of that. The whole concept was like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni getting together. They're like, how can we like package parenting lessons into Star Wars again?
Yeah, I could see some dads watching the scene with leaving the Razor Crest. It's like, be easier to carry the kids somehow, but still have your hands free. If only there was like a device you could like put the kid in, and so you could carry the kid that way. Like a Bjorn? I mean, could he just like flip the cape around and like
A Beskar Bjorn.
Yeah.
That's his next visit to the armorer.
Yeah.
Like, no, I don't need a weapon. I need a Beskar baby carrier.
I mean, the kid made good time with his little legs, and he's like wearing a bag. So, like, that's the other thing that gave me pause. He's wearing a bag. His feet have to get out sometime. Like, what? Get him more than a bag to wear. That apparently is pretty sturdy if the kid can walk around in the bag and not wear it out. So, power on the bag. But there's a lot to unpack there on the childcare side of it. And I didn't, so like giving the server money to keep an eye on the kid, I actually thought that was responsible, especially after the Razor Crest incident of, and it's like, you can't leave the kid in the car. It's like, this is how kids, take off the parking brake and the car rolls down the driveway into the street. Like, we don't want that situation.
I'm sure he rolled down a window.
Yeah,
It's the crack.
the door was open, so again, the kid could leave.
Crack the loading ramp a little bit, let a breeze come in.
Yeah. No, that server though does not seem trustworthy at all. Like, I would not leave my kid in her custody. She does not. It's not with it.
Seemed real clueless.
So it reminded the server reminded me of the 1980s show Alice, which was about a diner, and lead character was Alice, who was the waitress server, and it just, for some reason, it gave me that feeling, and I know that's weird, but it just reminded me of the old show Alice, which goes way back to the 80s.
Somebody listening to this podcast is an Alice fan and is giving his or her phone or computer a high five right now over that reference.
Yeah, it's all those good times at Alice Con. And that show also gave us the infamous line from one of the characters of "Kiss my grits." So the 80s was a magical time. Lots of good stuff. And for those who are listening, the looks on Gabby and Thomas's faces, this was, they did not experience this.
Some species age differently.
I was young when this was on, really, really young. This was the primetime TV that we had in my day, and we were grateful, damn it. We didn't have smartphones. We had Atari. So this gets into some of the wonderful issues with a little bit more backstory on the Mandalorians and what a foundling is, because we learn the Mandalorian does take off his helmet to
Yeah.
eat. They just have to do it alone. So that means he does shave and brush his teeth. Because I was concerned about that, of like, this could get gross fast if we see him without his helmet and he looks like a homeless dude that hasn't had dental care in a decade, and just bushy, out of control beard. So I was grateful he took it off and did have lunch and watching the kids play. That sounds like a nice day. Uh, let's get into the issue with Mandalorians taking either war orphans to raise them, and what that means and how that could work.
Yeah. I mean, because now we know, or we assume, we don't know for sure. I'm definitely of the camp that you don't know anything for certain until it's showed on screen. But we know that we believe that both of his parents died, that he's the kid in the flashbacks that we're seeing, and that both of his parents died when the whatever bunker doors were closed on him and there was an explosion. And so he says that the Mandalorians took him in when he was a kid, and that kind of taking him in, I mean, negating all of the kind of religious aspects of indoctrination and, was he technically kidnapped by a cult and all of this kind of stuff. But they would need to have some sort of legal standing in order to have guardianship over him. And I mean, you could consider him a war orphan, but if we're taking him under the kind of traditional standards of U.S. family courts, you would need to establish that there's not somebody that has a more significant connection to him that would be better served as his primary guardian. And what the court's going to look at always is what's the best interest of the child. Where is he best? What is the best for his needs and his situation? So whether that's with the Mandalorians and their kind of military warlike cult, or we don't know if he has additional family relations. We don't know if he has a neighbor. I mean, there's a case out of New Jersey where a neighbor actually got custody over a child over an aunt. So non-family members can get custody over family relations. But again, it has to be in the best interest of the child. And there has to be, you can't just be a random person and kind of walk up to a kid that you see and say, like, I'm going to take him. That's not how it works. So there had to be some sort of reason that they were able to step in and be the best interest for him.
When adoption laws are going to vary state to state in terms of their requirements, I could tell you that Pennsylvania has among the least requirements for folks to adopt. You don't have to be married. There's nothing about your particular background. There's no sort of income requirement that you have to meet. There's no showing that you have to make a certain amount or have a certain means to be able to offer the child a certain level of lifestyle or anything like that. And in some cases, there's not even an age requirement. So in some cases, you could have a situation where a minor could adopt, such as like a sibling or something. The critical element here that the Mandalorians would not have to face because his parents are dead is the requirement in a lot of states that the parents consent on some level to the adoption. That's going to be removed here, which is a lot, in some cases the biggest impediment to an adoption like this. But beyond that, I think the Mandalorians, like if they're operating in Pennsylvania, they'd be like pretty well. We're like the Tatooine of states in terms of adoption. Like they'd be well suited to come here and start the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's, Thomas, put on your JAG hat, and it's okay if you don't have an answer to this because I don't know if it's happened since God knows when. But we have soldiers deployed someplace where they say it's World War II, where there's a hell of a lot of war orphans. Parents are killed. Kid comes out of a concentration camp or rubble of Berlin, or or if we're in Afghanistan, parents were killed, and soldier starts taking care of a kid. Like, you're putting on your JAG hat. Has anything like that happened in the last 80 years that you're aware of? And does military law point to any answers on the soldiers taking a kid home as as an adopted child whose parents were killed?
The spoils of war. No, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. You cannot go. You cannot claim a child as spoils of war.
No, but
No,
you could. But his parents are dead, and I'm not going to leave the kid here to die. So yeah, he's coming. He's coming with me.
He's abandoned property.
It's kind of. He's abandoned.
No,
not property, but he's abandoned.
No, so I do not know of a case where that's happened. What I would say is at a basic level, U.S. forces would have an obligation to care for the child, so to get him or her some level of care. We wouldn't just be able to straight abandon. What that would probably look like is getting, once the child is stabilized or something like that, getting either locals involved. That would be the first and best option, is to see whether any sort of family exists. If there's any sort of remaining infrastructure or anything like that, local government, you do not want to pluck the child completely away from home and out of their element, no matter how much of a bond you may have formed. I would say the rules that we operate in today sort of strictly try to avoid that sort of scenario. And if you've ever seen, it is totally fiction, but the movie Hurt Locker, there's a reason why. We want rapport to be developed, but at a certain point it can be problematic for the mission. So in the sort of plot that I'm referencing there, Jeremy Renner's character gets really, really close with this young Iraqi boy that happens to work at a bazaar on their base. And then later in the movie, he thinks that this boy gets killed, and he goes bananas. He goes like off base and tries to hunt down and kill who he thinks is responsible for this boy's killing. And that can cause problems. And so I think certainly we're not going to ignore a kid that would be in need, but you would have to get over a lot of hurdles. I mean, there's no rule per se that bars you from adopting a child, but you're not bringing the kid back with you on the plane when you head back home. I mean, you're going to go back home and go through a normal adoption process. And in pretty much all the environments we operate in today, you're not going to make it over all those hurdles. There's going to be a better environment for that child that's found that's not your house, unfortunately.
Yeah, I also think of Cindy McCain, the widow of Senator John McCain. She was abroad in Bangladesh, and there was a infant with a cleft palate that needed medical help, and the short answer was, I'm adopting this child. So when she landed and her husband, the senator, greeted her, it's like, oh, new baby. And this is Bridget. So I do think it's an American phenomenon of like, we want to help. When you throw in a kid, there's always that issue of how do we help the child. But it's interesting to hear, like what actually happens, because it's not Europe World War II.
Yeah, so this actually did happen after World War II in Vietnam. There were hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese orphans who, and this is to answer your question, it wouldn't, like Thomas said, it wouldn't necessarily be that direct military connection of, a soldier coming in and saying, okay, kid, you're coming with me. A lot of nonprofits and NGOs come in and kind of organize and gather these orphans and then facilitate the civil adoption process. So in case anybody was curious, the big one for Vietnam was called Operation Baby Lift. And it was a mass evacuation of children from South Vietnam to not just the United States, but also our allies in Europe and Canada.
Yeah, perk of being highlights, we're the good guys. We don't leave children to die. We don't put them in, they don't go in cages. It's just one of those things. We're the good guys.
And those organizations, the NGOs and the non-military organizations, those are the folks who are best suited to do those things. Like the military is this great force for good generally, but at its core, it's designed and it's there to do one thing, right? Destroy the enemy, fully and completely. And anything else outside of that is really an ancillary function. And taking care of children and adopting children is like about as far from its core function as you can get. So you really don't want the military being responsible for those things. You want those other organizations empowered to make those things happen.
Yeah, I agree. It's not the military's core function, but I also think it's an American phenomenon that, our soldiers marry women in, and whether it was France or Vietnam, and, here's the new family I'm coming home with. So I think it's quintessential quality of what it is to be an American.
In some cases, as a surprise to their pre-existing family. That's another podcast.
Surprise! No, wrong surprise. Well, we just doubling back to contracts, because again, there's so many contracts issues in this. When we're standing outside the hut, and we learn the Mandalorian's bedside manner is bad news, you have to move. Which again was awesome. And the reaction, we do have some contract modification that takes place with deciding to train the villagers to be their own little fighting force. I'm not sure who made notes on this, but who wants to tackle that?
I was the one who kind of picked up on the modification, and I think also what that modification shows, because if you notice, as soon as we get the Mandalorian's terrible bedside manner, Cara just kind of steps in and takes over, that she's like, okay, buddy, like you really can't negotiate with these people, so you take a step back and I'll handle modifying the agreement, which then tends to show that this may be more of a partnership if she has that ability to renegotiate or amend the original contract they had, that now instead of she's obviously the one that brings up, hey, you left out the fact that this was an ATST that these raiders had, that it's not just kind of a band of robbers or villains or whatever, but that they have some serious firepower behind them. She's also the one that kind of negotiates, okay, we'll train you to fight, we'll alter what we had originally thought about for it to be kind of a surprise attack. We bring him to us, we drop it in the lake, and kind of change, instead of being a deterrent, we actually kind of eliminate the force against you. So she does take on that more significant role of negotiating and modifying the contract.
I also enjoy the fact that he acknowledges she's the strategic thinker when it comes to deploying force, because he's used to being the one-man army of go out and catch someone. Like he's kind of that quasi law enforcement of, he's just the bounty hunter. Sure, he can go kill a building full of stormtroopers, but that's different than planning a military raid, and he recognized her expertise, which was just a nice to see with her leading most of the training with the hand-to-hand fighting or with the sticks. Maybe she learned some things from Ewoks, and was the Mandalorian doing target practice.
Well, I want to see the scene where she's a fresh recruit and the Ewoks are like, adjusting her stance and like moving the stick so that got it in the proper position. Wicket's just like chirping at her, like, no.
Dub dub.
No.
Oh golly. That's
It will pierce the armor at this angle.
I just really do hope she didn't have seconds at that feast. But well, let's get into, they go from deterrence to like full on, let's go raid the Raiders.
Raid the Raiders.
And let's get into the issue of is that self-defense? And because as a town, they have a right to self-defense. It's just as a nation. If we think of them as a nation state, they have a right to self-defense under the Geneva Convention. So like and they were attacked. So they're not the aggressor. They were attacked in broad daylight. They knew who the attackers were. People died. They're upset. And so is this justifiable self-defense to send in the Mandalorian and a shock trooper to go roll some heads? and Thomas, do you want to help us with that as the JAG officer here?
This is where you start to bleed the line of self-defense. I mean, you're taking preemptive action against the Klatooinians to prevent the next raid, and really they're going in there with the express purpose of drawing them out. I mean, they're not going in there just to get a good count on how many folks there are or whether they'll negotiate. They're going in there to punch them in the face and get this ATST to come out of the woods so that they can drop it into that little krill pond. And I think it stretches the limits of self-defense to argue that they can go in and take this sort of preemptive action, because there's some element of self-defense that requires imminency of threat or harm. And they're not waiting for the next attack here. I mean, these raiders are all camped at this point. They're not preparing for battle or getting ready to go out on the next raid. They're just hanging out, doing whatever Klatooinians do, probably like, I don't know, playing Zelda or something on their Switch. So it kind of stretches it at that point. Once they get into the fight, it also is a problem for self-defense, because you can't be the initial aggressor and then claim self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think their particular method of drawing them out is problematic from that standpoint.
So here's the thing, and maybe this is just because I'm at my core foreign policy that doesn't have a problem with preemptive war, that they're not preemptive, that they were already attacked, that they're already in a state of war, that they're living under threat, that the Raiders are gonna come back and do it to them again, and they're close in proximity, and they don't want to be a punching bag anymore, and that they have the right to defend themselves. And this is the town, again, thinking that it's like a nation state, that we're going to take the position that we've declared war because you guys struck us first. Now we're taking the fight to you, and we're going to take out your big walking toy because we're tired of dying because of you clowns. Mm-hmm. That would be my argument with this is all completely justified because we're not your punching bag.
Yeah. I would say, though, I tend to think of it less of a nation state and more under civil, principles and civil criminal principles of self-defense, in that, the idea that your home is your castle. So let's think of the village as kind of an extended home is your castle principle, and you have the most self-defense rights in your home. Well, what they're doing is essentially, if somebody came and broke into my house and destroyed my stuff, and I know it was my neighbor Bob, and I missed Bob the first time, but instead of going to law enforcement for whatever reason, I like go to Bob's house with the express purpose of getting him to break into my house again, and knock out, like, I don't know, his buddies that are there watching football with him, so in order
And blow
to
up
kind
Bob's ATST.
yeah, but it's I'm of the camp that, once the farther you move out of that circle of your home is your castle, and that's where your most concentrated self-defense rights are, you're getting very kind of grayer and grayer and grayer and grayer the farther you get out. And especially the fact that this whole thing is kind of a ruse, or is specifically meant to draw them out. It's not to kind of go get back at them for what they did, if we're specifically looking at Kara and the Mandalorian's actions, separated from what happens later with the ATST. But that specific kind of initial aggression, I think takes it, you'd be hard pressed. They would need a very, very, very good criminal defense lawyer to argue self-defense for them.
Yeah, but this is a planet without laws, without a central government. The fact that they had to contract for their safety because there's no law enforcement to save them, to protect them from terrorists that are raiding their village and stealing their blue harvest. I don't have a problem with strike hard, strike fast, and break the bastards for what they've done. But we can clearly see where people line up politically when it comes to foreign policy. So that's I might be more in the Rumsfeld camp at this point. So that's.
I think what would have been interesting, it would have been a more interesting debate, and obviously this is not anywhere near Star Wars kind of narrative, but if the raiders, because we've seen the Tusken Raiders, and we've seen kind of other bands of bandits, for lack of a better word, and they're always some sort of animalistic looking alien, as opposed to these villagers are humanoid. They're just like us. They're these poor villagers, just trying to do their farming thing. And I tend to wonder what would have what would the reactions have been if the roles were reversed, or if the raiders / bandits / whatever you want to call them had also looked humanoid like the villagers. So how that would have kind of come into play. But
well, in a way that we, from a certain point of view, we have seen that Solo.
Yeah.
With we're on their planet, like we're the aggressors here. What's like they're doing their thing and we're blowing crap up. So this is on us. So we have seen it. Now, granted, we didn't see much of the indigenous people. Ironically, both directed by a Howard.
Yeah.
So there's that. That's fascinating right there. Both directed by a Howard. But yeah, I think that's probably the closest we've seen in live action to that. Well, let's get into surplus government property, because how the heck did the Raiders get an ATSD? It's like, how did that do? Was there a surplus sale? I mean, getting government surplus, going to the GSO website and dealing with the DRMO, all of that's wildly complicated. And I know some of that from scouting because getting government surplus boats for Sea Scout ships is way hard, to the point that you can't do it anymore. But, these raiders got in, on a walker. How they get it? Was it surplus? Was it abandoned? I think, Thomas, if you made the notes for this, why don't you take it? And Gabby, if you did, why don't you tackle this one?
I thought of it more as kind of pillaging or plundering, because this was clearly some sort of, this was the Empire's and the Imperial equipment if they found it on Endor, if they found it somewhere else. It's abandoned, but they're kind of taking it theoretically after the Battle of Endor. They somehow got their hands on it, and as the International Criminal Court defines it, appropriation and pillaging is done for private or personal use, which this is clearly not any sort of governmental or state organization. They were not part of the rebels. They're just this private bandit group that somehow got their hands on an ATST. And they're pillaging it. They're taking it for their own private use. And so it would be interesting to know if it was a secondhand pillage, meaning that some other private individual, nefarious individual got it from the Battle of Endor, or some other imperial, form, or some sort of other group that they were able to get it from the Empire. And then, somehow it ended up in the hands of this band of raiders. But it's definitely some sort of pillaging, stealing, theft, as opposed to any sort of abandonment. I think, they were left somewhere and somebody went and kind of just took all the imperial goods for the taking.
This is like one of the most fascinating aspects of this episode to me, and just this time period in general. When the toy for this ATST Raider came out from Hasbro, they've got sort of a scaled version of it. I wanted to know everything about it. Like, where did this thing get taken from? What battle was it left derelict in? How did they get it to wherever they have it operating? How are they using it? All those sort of things. This is like Gabby, you key in on some really important points, because I think for the New Republic, they have limited resources, so they can't tackle every issue, but misappropriation of abandoned Imperial military equipment is a huge issue. And this is not the only place that we've seen a significant chunk of Imperial hardware get used sort of in a nefarious way. If anybody listening has read the Aftermath trilogy, there's a bit about a Super Star Destroyer, one of the Empire's 13 or so that they had during the war, that gets captured by a group of pirates and renamed the Liberty's Misrule. And then it's a pirate Super Star Destroyer at this point. And so it's going on across the galaxy at all scales. I would say the Clatoonians sort of got like a chicken bone worth of military equipment if this is all they're able to get. But given the size of this conflict, the size of the Imperial Army and Navy, I mean, I have to think that there was a lot just laying around, whether it was an abandoned base that they took this from and transported it to Sorghum, or just they sort of planet hop place to place with it, or it was left derelict during a battle. The scope of that problem for the New Republic is kind of mind-blowing. I don't know how they would go about just policing up all this equipment, but it creates like massive problems, because here the New Republic doesn't have an official reach all the way out to this planet, yet somebody is taking a weapon of war and using it against the civilian population. So it's something that they would need to tackle.
This, again, being the history nerd that I am, I think of like post World War II, like it'd be like Japanese tanks or German tanks getting into the hands of a gang that's using it to go terrorize small villages. Like more extreme would be like, yeah, we got this, German submarine that we're going to go play pirate in. And like some of those, both with Japanese and German subs, that some of the advanced ones that we found, like we went out and sank them because we didn't want to risk the Russians getting them and learning the tech on them. So we decided to, like we didn't even keep it ourselves to see how it worked. We just killed it. this is, again, government surplus is wildly complicated, but this is spoils of war left over, and lawless gangs. It's like, I want my superstar destroyer, which what has a crew of 30,000. I mean, something insane like that. uh, that's a big ship. That's a lot of pirates. uh, Finding one dinky ATST and giving it kind of like a mohawk flat top haircut,
Mhm.
and some other artwork on the face of it to make it look scary. Uh, I mean, it's practical, no, but good terror weapon, you bet. That's that will scare the hell out of people. But yeah, definitely, we or again, end of the Cold War, and in the mid '90s, we were very afraid of the former Soviet Union having a massive bake sale of anything from tanks to ICBMs, because they couldn't afford to pay people, and you have starving commanders like, well, I could live like a king if I sell this ICBM. uh, that that's bad. And again, peace dividend of, like, do we buy everything from the Russians and not have to worry about this? um, if it's across the galactic civil war, that's a lot of leftovers that you have to deal with and try to destroy. So we looking towards the climax. We do have another bounty hunter show up, and Cara Dune takes care of him.
Mhm.
Uh, Gabby, do you want to jump on the defense of others issue with her?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of circles back. It seems like this episode was repeating a lot of the legal issues we've seen in episodes past. I mean, it opened with the parallel of duty to rescue, and now you have Kara kind of doing a parallel of defense of others. And I think, does she have a relationship with Baby Yoda? Maybe not, but it's clear that he's being targeted, or at least if she doesn't know necessarily that, unless she can see down the scope of this, whatever this bounty hunter had in his scope. She knows that he's targeting the village, right? She knows that he's targeting possibly the children. So I think she's well, as somebody who was specifically contracted to protect the village, I think she's well within her rights to kind of terminate him as a threat to the village, and a threat specifically to Baby Yoda. I think she's completing her contractual obligation, kind of above and beyond what was initially asked of her, as far as, she was just initially asked to, um, terminate the threat of the raiders. But she's kind of going with that underlying purpose of protecting the village and protecting the children in the village.
Well, it also raises, well said, but it also raises the issue with a partnership and a fiduciary duty that you would have to your partner,
Mm-hmm.
that the targets are either the Mandalorian or the kid, one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, within her fiduciary duty to go, it's, hey, he's going to kill my partner. Also, I think under defense of others, it's completely justified, because you can use lethal force if somebody else is going to use lethal force to kill a third party.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those facts are clearly there.
That was the scariest moment in all of Star Wars, when Baby Yoda was in the crosshairs there. My heart stopped.
Well, they did the same type of jump cut of hearing the gunshot that they did in the first
Yeah.
episode, that for like a hot second you're not sure who gets shot, and then obviously it's the person who is going to kill Baby Yoda. So they really need to stop doing that, because I have way too many gray hairs from that. But that I can see that becoming a recurring theme in this, of the jump cut, of somebody trying to kill Baby Yoda and then actually getting shot in return.
There's a surprising number of bad guys who get shot in the back, both
This is true.
both the Mandalorian and now Cara Dune have both offed bad guys in the back. It's like, and again, like clearly bad, clearly going to kill somebody else. With the exception of maybe some stormtroopers who do get shot in the back. But yeah, they don't mess around, and there's no remorse with bang, bang.
Yeah.
Next. Bad guy gone now. Yeah. So now one of you put the final question here of is it okay
The
to be
most important question.
Yeah, is it okay to be jealous of the kid that got to hug Baby Yoda? And the answer is, yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's completely okay. It'd be inhuman if you didn't feel that way. He's an adorable little puppet, and everyone wants to hug him. That's completely normal.
Yeah, no, that just like the kids playing with Baby Yoda, and then the little girl getting to go up to him and hug him just kind of broke me, and I was like, I want to hug him too.
Yeah, the answer is absolutely yes, because I'm still jealous as we sit here right now talking about the scene. I'm not even watching it, and I'm jealous.
It's bloody adorable. Like there's it's like swing big on cuteness, and
But that literally, it captures how I feel at the end of every single episode, because she's like, I'll miss you. And I'm like, me too. Me too.
It's like the E.T. ending. It's like, I'll be right here. It's like, and everyone's sobbing. Like they do that weekly. And like, that's hard to pull off once. Doing it consistently, that's art that for people to feel a massive emotional connection to a puppet. That's, again, Star Wars filmmaking at its purest of how do they pull that off?
Well, I think not just the emotional connection to a puppet, but the fact that, I mean, this is kind of mind-boggling, and I would never think that, I would have never thought that we would have been sitting here talking about this, but the fact that you're able to get an emotional connection of a dude wearing a helmet, you can't see his face, to a puppet, it like that just blows my mind. It like boggles my mind. There's no actual human facial expressions, and that, if you think about it, could have been the total undoing of this show. That it's like, oh, you have a dude in a helmet and he's like, becomes the adopted parent of this puppet, like, great. But there's so much emotion there, and I think that, like you said, Josh, that's Star Wars storytelling at its best, that it's just epic.
Yeah, the fact that Star Wars makes fans want to run around and hug each other, it's like, wow. Like you all get a gold medal.
Mm-hmm.
Well done. It's just, you made Werner Herzog cry. Okay. That's just
That's all you need to know.
It's like game, set, match. I would love like to hear more behind the scenes after season one's over to learn how Filoni and Favreau came up with this. Like, how can we shock everyone and then hook them in a way that no one expects it in a show about bounty hunters? And it's like, gotcha, you're ours now. And we're not going to make any merchandise because we don't want to blow the surprise. Hell yeah.
I genuinely hope it's because, and I don't want to, this isn't meant to take anything away from Favreau, but I genuinely hope that it's Filoni just channeling the best parts of George Lucas, because I remember him talking about the experience of sitting with George and as they created the Clone Wars, and the concept of Anakin having a Padawan came up. And Filoni is new, and he's like, well, Anakin doesn't have a Padawan. Like, this isn't going to work. And George's reaction, like, yeah, he's got a Padawan. Like, it's done. And it just came to be like that. And that was just his attitude about literally everything that they created. And, I hope that he's, after all the time working under George, I know this answer, but he's embodied that sort of sense of wielding the wand to create what you want to create, even if it's not expected. Yeah, there's a Baby Yoda. Yeah, of course there's a third of this species.
Was he just in bed asleep one night and then heard George's voice say, "Baby Yoda"?
Baby Yoda.
And like
In
and
the
then
dream, was he wearing a plaid shirt? I would have.
always it's the uniform now. And then he jumped up and called Favreau at 3:00 in the morning to tell him, like, that's how I see.
George visited me.
George visited me in a dream.
But I have the answer.
And Filoni could say, or Favreau could say, "Me too." And here we are. Yeah, one wonderful world we live in. Now, let's comparing Geek Swag. Who's ordered what? Gabby, I remember you got a Cara Dune Funko
Yep.
Pop.
Mm-hmm.
Any other? And you have it. That's adorable.
Yes.
Any other swag?
Nope.
Okay, it's young. It's early, and Christmas is coming. So, and
Yes.
you've been a very good lawyer, Thomas.
I snagged the Mandalorian Black Series figure back. What was that? Triple Force Friday. The last few weeks have felt like 800 years in Star Wars time, because so much has happened. But I got that, and then I ordered a "This Is the Way" shirt over the weekend, and then I realized I stupidly had not ordered my 18-month-old daughter a Baby Yoda shirt, and I quickly fixed that tonight, and so a Baby Yoda shirt is on the way for her. She's going to be the most styling girl at daycare, and all the other kids are going to be like, "What's Star Wars?" But yeah, so that was a critical error that I remedied. But other than that, I now desperately want that ATST. That heavy Mandalorian figure that looks so cool is on my Christmas wish list. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I do covet having a Mandalorian heavy Black Series action figure like that. That looks like such a work of art, and maybe like get to so I could open one. Like that's like they're that beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I get these, as you know, I get many of these for props for blog posts and set up my little white box and take pictures and edit and all that good stuff. So I was able to get a Mandalorian Black Series, and that only took 4 or 5 GameStops to find, and I think maybe 2 or 3 Targets. So that took some looking.
I'm jealous of your little Razor Crest. I'm gonna be like if we lived next to each other, I'd be like a Jawa, and I would just salvage it.
Next time you go to Target, like it was in the, I don't remember if it was the Star Wars section or the Hot Wheels section, but they were like $4.99. So you too can get one quickly. They're and you got a daughter, so at some point you're gonna have to go shopping. So I'm sure
This is true.
and they're affordable, so it's democratic. Everyone can have one. So I got that. I did get on the bobblehead side. I did get a Mandalorian and an IG-11. And on the Black Series, I also got a Jawa, not knowing how important they would be. It was just one of those guesses of knowing what Jawas do. They could have legal issues connected to them. So
Good choice.
it's just, yeah, and I'm glad I did. So like, it was like, I made the right call. But yeah, I would like a Cara Dune, and when an IG-11's available, I know he will look a lot like my IG-88, and I can live with that. They can live in the case together. So yeah, it's Christmas has come early thanks to the Mandalorian. So any other thoughts on this episode that you would like to share? I mean, besides, it's like this is our introduction to Cara Dune, and and with all the interviews with the actress, I absolutely adore her.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice to see her in character doing her thing, and and she does her stunts.
Yeah.
She settles the argument over whether women in Star Wars should be in combat. Not that there ever was much of an argument for the other side to begin with, but
yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that ever happened. So like that's a.
she body slammed the argument and then crushed its flamethrower.
Yeah. It was nice to know that, or well, I guess not nice, that, you know, the period of Star Wars fandom peace finally ended, you know, with a female directed episode, a female introduction character of a character that, you know, took down the Mandalorian, and also a female who, as many on Twitter said, somehow randomly knew how to shoot. So, you know, that seemed to trigger the kind of fandom menace, if you will, and just kind of brought all the dredges of the fandom up, which, you know, I was wondering how long it would take. It did seem that, you know, the peace would not last. So, you know, it was good to know that order was restored. as unfortunate as that order is.
So I don't like follow. I'm like, when I go on Twitter, you know, it's usually quick. So I missed anyone griping about Omira's. It is Omira, right? Okay, Omira's. The fact that she clearly knows what she's doing. That means there's something there. That means that there's a backstory. Like the way Rey could use a lightsaber because she had years of experience using a staff. She understands how a handheld weapon works. Not great with it, but still trained in hand-to-hand combat. It makes sense. I didn't know there were people whining, and that's very, very upsetting to hear, because it's like, get over it, angry fan.
It's a blaster, and this is Star Wars. It's not like the dark saber or some like ancient relic. Like, and you're in the country. Like,
there was much objection to the fact that she was a woman, and that of all the people in the village, she was the only one that knew how to shoot, which totally negated the idea of, apparently this person did not know the traditional Western, and in the traditional Western, the widow who has been left behind to protect her house and her family and her town is usually the best shot in the village, or the town. So, you know, it's
literally
just
nothing new.
Yeah, nothing new, nothing like extreme or anything. It's just, you know, too much female empowerment in this episode, apparently, and too much radical feminism, which was interesting to see. But
yeah, I just watched it and was happy. So I don't understand people who think that way. That's just very disappointing. I mean, again, growing up, since I'm older than you, when I was a young boy, you know, that's like when Happy Days started on TV. So, well, maybe before I was born, but still, when I was a very, very young kid, I remember Happy Days as a young child in the late 70s. Ron Howard was there. So I've always thought Ron Howard was neat. He's a fan of sci-fi. He's a great director. So seeing his daughter be a chip off the old block, I found adorable, because she learned from Dad, both acting and directing. And like, that's just freaking awesome to see, you know, like a family tradition there where both, you know, it's like, and there's a, you know, again, the father-daughter relationship of, it's like, she's a director like Dad. That's neat. So I'm disappointed to hear of angry fandom when we have wonderful Star Wars to enjoy. So I just.
But I take the negative with any time I see that. I dive right in to all the glorious goodness that we are getting out of the Latinx Star Wars community. from having Baby Yoda, or as we've now re-Christianed him in the Latinx community, he is now Yodito, and he has his tío Mando, and they are just like going through and they are living the Latinx experience, and I love it, and I love all the jokes, and it's great. It just makes me so happy.
There are two videos that have gone around with the one was the Mandalorian spaghetti western intro, and the other was the Mandalorian 1980s TV show.
Yes.
Which with the cheesy 1980s song, and I just felt so much love and warmth from both of those, and just the pure talent to pull off stuff like that. It's like, oh, I love you guys. Yeah, I don't understand being a schmuck, because that actually takes effort. It takes effort to be a schmuck, and I'm just disappointed to hear that when we have something that's so wonderful and fun.
Yeah, my only gripe is that it's tough to find stuff to fill the void between Friday and Friday. I blame Disney. They are clearly at fault for this travesty, so that's my big complaint.
It's we get to do lots of blog posts in between. I think we
true.
have like 7 or 8 that we all can be working on. For anyone listening, stay tuned. Multiple lawyers are going to be working on these because there's that much to talk about. The A teams come together, and and we're going to do this. So, and after we're done recording tonight, I'll be working on a blog post. But I can't help but wonder, and again, speculation with Star Wars is the first path to disappointment and people going crazy. But I think from a storytelling perspective that The Mandalorian probably wants backup because he can't do everything alone. So picking up the body of IG-11 would be in his best interest to swing by, grab that, and fix it, and that way he could have that. Because I do think it'd be kind of a fun strike team to see Mandalorian, IG-11, and Cara Dune, working together. I think that'd be a fun little team.
And he certainly wouldn't want to leave IG-11 for those Jawas on Arvala 7 to reprogram and send after him.
Yeah.
That would be almost equally as good if IG-11 just becomes this agent of those Jawas that chases him all over the galaxy. Like, not a super serious threat, but just one of those that he constantly has to deal with, and he's like, the Jawas send their regards. Stuff just starts exploding.
The other direction would be to take it with the old Pink Panther movies, where Kato was constantly trying to attack Clouseau as to get them sharp. So one of them had the constant joke of "Not now, Kato." So it'd be similar to that of but I don't think Pascal can do a Peter Sellers. That's just probably my probably for the best. Probably for the best. But again, we live in a wondrous age, and we get lots to talk about through all of December, and just with nothing but Star Wars. I mean, we need to catch up on Resistance, and then we're going to have Rise of Skywalker. So there's never been this much Star Wars at once.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful time to be alive. So with that, I hope everyone's had a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend, that you are playing with whatever Star Wars toys that can sit on your desk and give you inspiration for whatever motion you have to write, and be able to get ready for Rise of Skywalker later this month, because we're in the last month of 2019. So with that, everyone, thank you for tuning in, and stay geeky, America.